So I started as a software developer after I graduated in 1994, and I studied artificial intelligence. And it was impossible at that time to find a job that had to do with machine learning and neural networks and stuff. So had I been a graduate today, I would probably have been able to find work in my own field. And I worked in various software companies, both in roles as developer, as product manager, as a consultant, and yeah, different roles. And really what I'm passionate about is to work with other smart and passionate people with product and technology innovation. That's really what drives me. And I have an excuse for standing here because for 18 months, I acted as test lead in 2 separate projects. That's now 8 years ago. So I have some exposure to your profession as well, although indirectly. Just briefly about Compello. We are about 80 people, 18 of which are here in Colombo. We have offices in Norway, Sweden, and then through our partner here in Colombo, 99X. And we, as a company, we have revenues about 100 million Norwegian kroner. We have about 100,000 users of our software, spread across about 1,000 paying customers. But some of our customers are actually distributors who, again, have many paying customers. So in total, we have about 7,000 companies using our solutions. And we both sell directly and also through a network of about 50 partners. Compello is working mainly with invoice processing, both inbound and outbound. So we are one of the biggest vendors in the Norwegian market when it comes to e-invoice distribution. So in Norway and many other European countries, there's a regulation saying that if you're going to do business with, for instance, with the government, you have to invoice the government electronically. If not, you're not allowed to do business. That's part of both being more digital, but also part of reducing waste and paper and so on. So we are one of the biggest vendors of that. So we can receive invoices from our customers, and we can split them into different channels, send them to whatever channel we need, and deliver in many different ways to our customers. And we also do the ingoing process, where the customer receives invoices from their suppliers, and then have an approval process internally before it's booked into their own ERP system. And finally, we are also working with EDI solution, electronic document interchange, in the energy industry. So kind of that is the business we are in. All our solutions are offered as cloud-based SaaS services, and they have to be available 24/7. This is the team, part of it, that is developing these services. This picture was taken this week. Here we are 25, but in total we are 34 in my team, in both development, testing, and operations. And we plan actually to grow that, so we will be 43 by the end of first quarter next year. And when you think about we are 80 people in the company, that means that roughly 50% is working with product development. So we are really investing in our own products. When it comes to myself and my exposure to testing and test methodologies and so on, I'm not a test professional. But I've been managing software development teams for 20 years. So I have had a lot of exposure, both directly and indirectly, to it. And I think my journey has been similar to many who has been in the IT industry for many years. I started basically after first having worked as a developer for a few years. I started in a Norwegian software company called Contempus. I was working there for about 10 years. It was a company focusing on electronic document management and workflow solutions. And we were very traditional. We sold products, delivered it on a CD, installed it locally at the customer site, and we typically did 1 major release and 1 to 2 minor releases per product per year. And the development was done in a very typical waterfall model. That basically means that testing was done, so if we had a release in January, the testers basically started test that release in about November. So it was very, very old-fashioned way of doing development. And all the testing was done manually. We didn't have a single automated test, not even a unit test. Then Contempus was acquired by our biggest competitor, and I thought that's a good opportunity to do something else. So I started work in a Actually, it's an American company called Cyber, which is a big consulting company. But I was hired to do work for another Norwegian company called the GNV-GL, which is a certification authority, which some of you may have heard of. So if your company, for instance, does ISO 9001 or something like that, or ISO 27000 certification, DNV is one of those companies who it's a certification body. And there I was hired as a technical lead initially to lead the implementation of a worldwide rollout of a document and records management solution. After about 6 months into that project, the current test lead, he left. And then they asked me, can you do the test lead job as well? So then I acted both as tech lead and test lead. And then they started a CRM project and also an enterprise search. And they asked, can you take the tech lead role in the enterprise search? And I said, I was stupid, and I said yes. And then they said, can you also take the test lead role in the CRM project? And again, I was stupid, and I said yes. I was happy because that meant, as a consultant, I could basically bill them something like 70 hours a week. What I didn't think about was that my wife and kids were not so happy because I didn't get to see their father. But in those projects, that was my first exposure to using automated testing. And it was my first exposure to professional testing tools. So in this project, we used the Mercury Quality Center from HP, and we used what's called Load Runner to do performance testing. And that opened my eyes a little bit on what is possible to do when you have the right tools and the right people to do proper automation. And it was really, really critical for us in order to complete those projects on time, because there were so many use cases that every time we did preparing for a new release, if we had to do a manual regression of all of that, it would have taken weeks and weeks, if not months, to complete all the test cases if you had to do it manually. I only stayed in that position 2 years because then the project ended, and then I was contacted by another Norwegian software company called Adra. Adra is a company focusing on what happens when a company closes its books. So when you do your month-end reporting or your quarter-end reporting or your year-end reporting, your financial reporting. It's basically like a QA process for your finance. So Adra created solutions for what's called reconciliation and financial close software. I got the luxury of starting a greenfield project. Even though they had legacy products, we were able to start from scratch to build everything up from scratch based on a modern cloud architecture. It was a really, really fun and exciting project. And there are people in this room who was part of that journey. Because then also Adra also was working with a company here in Sri Lanka. Now, in Adra, at my time, we didn't really come all the way to full automation. We stopped at unit testing. But it was good in another way because it was my first true project with running short release cycles, where we typically release new stuff every 1, 2, 3, 4 sprints. A release cycle could be anywhere from 2 to 6 to 8 weeks. So it's still not continuous, but at least much more frequent than in the old world. And there we felt the pain of not having built-in automation from day one. Because, of course, regression, it wasn't a pain initially because the product, since it started from scratch, we did an MVP release first, so it was a very kind of small scope of the initial product. But as the product grew, regression became more and more of a headache. And also we started to feel that as the system grew and more customers came on and bigger customers came on, suddenly we had some performance issues. It would have been very good to have a performance test suite to help us in that. So there was a lot of work. But it was, even so, we had a very large success in Adra. And one of the things I'm most proud of my career is that in 2014, based on this new product platform that we developed, Adra was named as one of the 100 most innovative technology companies worldwide, so-called Red Herring Awards. And it was good for us as a small Norwegian-based software company to be named together with companies like Google, who was a previous winner. Salesforce is a previous winner. A lot of those who today are household names in the IT industry were recognized early by Red Herring, saying this is a future. I was approached by a company called It's Learning. Now, It's Learning is a learning management system, an e-learning provider. They have about 7 million active users. At any one time, they have 300,000 users hitting their web servers within a 30-second period. So at any one time, we have 300,000 users hitting our web servers, doing simultaneous operations. So for me, it was another scale when it comes to user and load than what I've been used to. And it also was another scale in terms of complexity of the development, because this is a huge platform. Working on this product, we had 24 Scrum teams. That's quite extensive. 180 people in total in development, QA, and operations were developing this platform. And I was responsible for implementing a continuous delivery cycle, because they had used to do kind of release every 2 to 3 months, but we wanted to go continuous. So basically, every story and epic, as soon as this was approved by the product owner, so that meant that, for instance, in 2017, we did 180 releases. So that meant, on average, every second day, there was a release to production. Some days, of course, there were none. Other days, you could have 5 or 10, because typically towards the end of the sprints, then more of the stories were done, so then we kind of had more stories being developed. We did every type of automated testing you can imagine, almost, using all types of tools. Anything from Selenium to Protractor to, I don't even know the names of all of them. Of course, we did a very important component, I think always, is the manual testing, the exploratory testing. You will never get rid of that. And I still think that for the end user interface, to me, it's still the most efficient way of doing testing. A lot of companies, when they start with automation, they start automating on the user interface. So they use something like Selenium, and they write scripts there. But of course, if you have a modern web-based user interface, typically that is driven from a layer of APIs. And those APIs are also interacting with your business partner. So what we focused a lot on was not so much doing the user interface automation, but doing the API endpoints, testing out all the endpoints. And then on the user interface, we basically only automated the happy part, the normal user path, and the rest was covered on the user interface was covered by exploratory manual testing. We also had a quite extensive performance testing suite, because with 7 million users and 300,000 hitting your web server every 30 seconds, performance counts. One small bad written query, which on a developer's PC, you think, okay, it takes 130 milliseconds instead of 90. You don't notice it, but when you have 300,000 hitting your web server at once, then it matters. Also, of course, since the customers here are schools and universities, they don't want your grades to get mixed up with your grades. Or they don't want anyone outside to get access to that data. So every month, we had an external company. First, we had their own security testing team, but also we had an external company that every month attacked us, did any type of penetration testing they could come up with. It was really, really challenging, but also fun. And of course, you then had to coordinate 24 Scrum teams to do that, and to make it more complex. Those Scrum teams, we had 2 locations in Norway. We had 1 location in Russia, 1 in Poland, 1 in the Netherlands, 1 in Romania, and 1 in the US. So we basically had developers spread over 7 locations, all working on the same code base. So the Scrum of Scrum was really fun. But it was a good experience, but it was also challenging. But I learned a lot about that to try to get this up and running. So that's kind of how I've been exposed to testing. And it's been very important part, and it's still an important part now in Compello. I started in Compello now on the 1st of January, so I'm still fairly new. But we are also on the journey in Compello now, because Compello has also been a traditional software company that mainly has had on-premise customers, and now we are moving to the cloud. So we have some cloud solutions today, but they are not written as cloud solutions, because they have been the old on-premise solution that has been moved up into the cloud. So now we are running a project over the next 3 years to basically revitalize our product platform, move all our customers in the cloud, and take full advantage of cloud technologies. And for us to succeed in that, testing will have to be done in the right way. So that's one of the things I'm here in Colombo this week, is we are having team workshops discussing both with team members from Norway and here in Colombo on how we're going to plan this 3-year project. So if I were to give you my take on test automation after basically working with it in a management position for the last 20 years, I think what I would say is as follows. It's expensive. To do proper test automation, it's expensive. It takes time. Good automation engineers cost more than manual testers. you don't necessarily see the result at once. So as someone who has to pay the bills, at least sign for the bills, luckily the money doesn't go out of my own account, it is expensive. And it's, as I said, it's sometimes difficult to prove to someone who's outside the process that it's worth the money. Another problem with test automation is that the tests keep breaking all the time. And sometimes standing on the outside, it feels like most of the issues caught by the automation suite are problems with the seat itself in that it hasn't been updated, so it breaks. So I would say there are more instances of breaking tests than the automation suite actually catching bugs. And that is, of course, frustrating for someone in my role. And I think it's a problem for the profession itself. If you focus your automation efforts in the wrong place or do it in the wrong way, you spend too much time keeping the suite up to date. Refactoring because of changing happening in other parts of the application that affects your application. One of the worst examples I've had were in a team where we had a lot of UI automation, and it didn't work on tags, it worked on other properties. So when the company decided to switch from yellow to blue colors, the whole automation suite failed because it was catching the graphical elements and not the tags, the HTML tags or tags in it. So take care when creating automation suites and put the automation in the right place. And of course, we can automate and automate and automate, and we can manually test and manually test and manually test. But no matter how much we invest in our testing, our customer will still fool us. They will find bugs, even serious bugs, that we haven't caught. So sometimes it feels like it's a game you cannot win. The customers will always make a fool out of you. But that being said, when you do it right, I would not want to go back to the way it was when I started out managing software teams back in 1998. I wouldn't go back. But I've been becoming more and more conscious on it's important to do it in the right way. And also, automation cannot solve everything. There's always a balance on where to use automation, where not to use automation. So I think that is quite important. I thought to get some interactivity, can we have a show of hands for these questions, please? So I can see kind of what you are doing. How many of you work in some type of agile development team, a Scrum team or something similar, Scrum or Kanban or whatever? Yeah, that's at least 80%, if not more. And I think that's become prevalent across the industry, more or less. Majority of us do some type of agile today. However, I'm guessing this is not so many. How many of you operate in teams that actually do continuous delivery? Meaning you deliver when the story is done. You don't do formal type of releases every sprint or whatever. Do any of you work in teams that do proper test-driven development? That is, you write the test before you write the code that you should test. Well, we have two hands or something like that. That's the typical ratio. I have still not had the luxury of working in a team where full TDD has been implemented. It has been a goal of the industry for many, many years. For many of us, it's the holy grail of software development. It remains something we read about in books and articles and blogs, and we seldom get the opportunity to actually try it out ourselves. How many of you use Selenium or any other UI-focused tool to do automated UI testing? Yeah, that's about 2/3 maybe. But how many of you then use automation to test your APIs and other non-UI endpoints? Well, actually more than I expected, maybe about 1/3. So that's good. That shows that there actually is a fair, decent level of maturity in this room when it comes to test automation. If there is one recommendation I could give you is think about that in your teams. That gives more value to your automation. More bang for your buck. And also APIs tend to be more stable than the user interface. So you can actually typically avoid a lot of rewrites, a lot of breaking tests that way. Now, this is really something that I drive in every team I'm working with. In the teams you work with, is QA seen as a total team responsibility? Or is it something they basically say, no, you are the testers, it's mainly your responsibility? Would you say, for those who feel that it is a total team responsibility, and that the developers are fully joining in the testing efforts? Raise your hand. Maybe 5% if so, right? To me, that is one of the biggest failures we do as Scrum teams or as development teams in general. It's called quality assurance. Assurance basically means that's the last thing you do. You assure something at the end. You assure the quality is there, but to get the quality there, there's a lot of things leading up to that to make sure that the quality is there. In its learning, that was vital for us. We said we had, with that size of product, with that size of team, there was no way we could leave the responsibility for quality in the product to the testers. Then we would have to have more testers than we had developers. Would not be very productive. So we needed to make sure that the whole team took responsibility for the quality in the product. The whole team needed to join in on that. And the testers were the professionals that kind of did the final verification and guided the team in the QA process. And that, to me, is very, very important. I guess all of you are familiar with the test pyramid, right? That one is a staple in the QA industry. And typically, when we move from traditional to agile development, we say that we try to flip the test pyramid around. Because in traditional software development, typically the majority of testing is done with manual testing through the user interface. Then you might have some automation, a few unit tests, and your focus is to locate the bugs. Let's get rid of the bugs. That has been the main focus of the testers, right? Let's find the bugs. I'm bug hunting today. To succeed with this transition to agile and to succeed going from traditional software delivery to going to delivering solutions in the cloud and being more continuous in your delivery practice, we need to have to kind of switch the test pyramid around. And our mindset has to be not to find and fix the bugs, but to prevent them from reaching the QA step. Because if you're using, for instance, Jira or some other tool with your swim lanes, right? On the end, you typically have QA or something like that, typically towards the end of your swim lanes. That's kind of where you have that. It's very, very expensive if you only discover the bug when it's come that far. Because that should be this final gate before it goes into production. And the developer, he might already have moved onto something else. So he will then have to backtrack his mind, depending, of course, the length of iteration you do. But he might have to backtrack his mind anything from a few days to a few weeks to see, okay, what did I really do there? It's not very effective for the team. It costs a lot to find the bug late. It costs a lot to fix the bug, because you might actually have done other things that depend on the code you wrote. So then you might have to refactor things, and so on. So the goal should be prevent bugs from reaching the QA step. And that cannot only the QA engineers do. Then we need to have the whole team to work together, to have that mindset, to have that focus. And we should actually measure it. The team should set KPIs for themselves to say, how many bugs can we stop before they reach QA? And you should celebrate when you make it good. For many of us, and probably many in the room, this is the holy grail of test automation. When you more or less have automated everything. You have your unit tests, good coverage, you have testing of the component, integrations, APIs, UI, and then you do your manual exploratory testing on top. Even though we came far with it in its learning, I would say I never worked somewhere where you could say that this holy grail is fully met. There's always more to do. But also, as I've been working with this, I find that not everything should be automated. Some things have too high cost for automation because it changes too frequently. Or you try to automate edge cases. And I'm more concerned about automating what you can call the happy path, the main use cases. Because there are so many edge cases, so many variants. If you have a fairly complex software product, To have full coverage in your automation suite of all the edge cases, it's almost impossible, and you are almost guaranteed to fail. For some customers who come up with an edge case that you haven't thought about. So then I'm much more comfortable by having, of course, you try to have good coverage here. Here it's also easy to measure coverage. But that being said, for me, unit testing is, for me, actually, the most important part of unit testing is not to catch bugs being propagated up the other levels. For me, the most important thing with unit testing is that it instills a type of discipline to the developer. It makes him think one more time of his implementation. It makes him think about edge cases. It makes him think about those type of things. And that, of course, helps errors and potential things going up through the layers. But I have almost never seen that a serious bug has been caught by the unit test. Almost always, it's some higher level test that catches serious bugs. Because on the unit test level, you are not operating on the level of complexity in a single method where those serious bugs typically occur. And if you do unit testing and if you do code reviews, kind of in-your-face problems, you will catch them. So very rarely do I find that the unit tests catches serious bugs, but they may prevent them from occurring in the first place. When it comes to my approach to testing and what I try to guide my teams, and I'm not always successful, but that's what I try to do at least, I like to think of testing as a more, let's say, a more all-encompassing process. And to me, testing starts with someone comes up with an idea. Whether it's someone in the team, whether it's the product owner, whether it's an external stakeholder. They say, I have this great idea for this functionality or this new model or this new product. The test approach should start even there, exploratory. Try to uncover and challenge the assumptions behind the idea. Are there any inherent risks here that we need to think about if we're going to develop this? Are there potential problem areas that we need to think about, things that impact other things we have done? Or there you start to have this QA mindset when you start discussing an idea before you have coded a single line of code. And it moves on. So let's say you say, yeah, we take this idea. So you start to groom it, right? And you start to create artifacts. You create stories, you create epics. You might have started to create your acceptance criteria. You might have data flow diagrams, other artifacts before you start coding. Here also, it's important that the QA are involved. You, with your background, your expertise, need to be involved in this process. You need to question, kind of, have you thought about this? Has this impact on something else? The acceptance criteria, of course, often, how is it in your teams? Is it the product owner or is it the QA that writes the acceptance criteria? It should typically come from the business, but often I find that they leave it to the testers. And that's, of course, wrong, because then you're kind of writing the acceptance criteria and then you also determine whether you pass them. So it's not really good to do it that way. So you test the idea, you test the artifacts. Sometimes you then have some designs. More and more today, prevalent, and I guess a lot of you do that. You might have some UX designers on your team that create wireframes, mock-ups, those type of things. Those need to be tested as well. Do we have, for instance, guidelines for our UX, both graphical and interaction-wise? Does this mock-up, if you implement this, is it consistent with the rest of the application? Will an end user familiar with the application understand what to do? This data flow here, are there potential problems for performance? All these things should be part of the discussion. And you as QA professionals should be involved in that and kind of help that the team doesn't forget those important things, because as developers, we want to move into coding. That's what we like. We want to code, and we want to minimize these things coming up front. And then, of course, we code. Then we should test the code. And that, of course, there are kind of two parts of that. One is exploratory, and with the exploratory, I mean, that's actually the code review process. And that's maybe what I'm most concerned with in my teams. I want to make sure that they have a good culture for code reviews. The best tech lead I ever had in a team, outside the room where that team was, he had a poster on the door, and he said, leave your ego on the other side of this door. Because he said, when you come in here, there is no longer your code or my code. It's our code. It's no longer your preference for indentation on your code. It's no longer your preference for how you want to name your methods. We have agreed on a coding standard. And we help each other to uphold it and evolve it. What you do on your hobby project at home, I don't care. It's what we have decided as a team is best for us as a team. That's what we all should hold as place. And code reviews is a great tool, both to kind of uphold each other to a standard you agreed on, to help prevent bugs and potential architecture, short thinking prevail. And also important for me, everyone in the team should have the opportunity to do a code review of anyone else's work. The most junior QA should be able to do code review of the tech lead, and vice versa. It's not like the seniors always should do code reviews of the juniors. Code reviews is also a great teaching opportunity and a learning opportunity. And it's also a good way of disseminate knowledge in the team, so that you don't kind of have vital parts of your application where the knowledge basically sits only in the head of 1 or 2 people, but that actually that knowledge is disseminated among all the team members. So to me, that's also a very important part of the QA process actually, is doing proper code reviews. The other part here, of course, is unit tests. That's the automation part of it. And as I mentioned, to me, unit testing is actually more important in the discipline it instills in the developers than in actual catching so many bugs. But if you do it right, you will help prevent bugs from occurring. Finally, you test the software. That, of course, is both the manual exploratory testing, but it's also the automation. And again, don't just think about the UI. Try to do it at a lower level. Don't forget the APIs and all the other endpoints, your HTTP endpoints, any integration endpoints. That's where I like my teams to put their efforts. UI, I prefer to do as little as I can. And finally, test your process. Have the same QA mindset against your process, right? Because if you're doing Scrum or another agile process, you typically do your retrospectives. That's a great opportunity also to see, okay, what can we do to improve our QA process? Both when it comes to tooling, processes, thinking, how can we get the whole team to take responsibility? QA is not a tester responsibility. When you say that QA is the tester responsibility, that's the first sign that you have a team that really will not be able to scale, and a software that will not be able to scale over time. So that's kind of how I think about testing. Always try to push your tests as far down the test pyramid as you can. And if you have a higher level test that spots an error, and it hasn't been caught by any on your lower level test, then try to write a lower level test that will catch that bug. And then refactor your higher level test, try to remove that from the higher level testing. So try, as you find bugs, problems in your high level test, see, can I actually, is there some way I can catch this at a lower level? I find too many teams that kind of say, okay, we found an error here on the higher level, great. I want my teams to say, okay, I found it here, how can I find it lower? I want to find it sooner, because the cost of fixing it goes down. For each level, we go down. And of course, the worst if we find it in production. That's the highest cost. Also in terms of customer satisfaction, of course. And your higher level tests, they should only focus on things that are not covered in your lower level tests. So try to avoid duplication as far as possible. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes some duplication is inevitable. But try to maintain your test suite so that kind of you test that one thing one place. Finally, some words of encouragement. Keep calm and carry on testing, and stay alive and avoid zombies.